You ever walk into a place that decided who you were, before you even said a word? The glass doors opened without a sound, just a soft glide that barely acknowledged his presence, and Marcus Reed stepped inside with his daughter's small hand tucked into his, her fingers wrapped around his like it was the most natural place in the world, like nothing outside that moment could touch them, the lobby stretching wide in polished marble and warm gold light, the kind of place where every surface reflected quiet money and quiet judgment. And for a second he paused, not out of hesitation but out of habit, eyes moving once across the room, taking in the front desk, the leather chairs, the people who didn't look up, and then he kept walking, steady, measured, like he belonged there because he did, even if no one else had noticed yet, and beside him, little Ava adjusted the strap of her backpack, the one with the fading cartoon patch stitched near the corner. Her sneakers soft against the floor that had probably never seen dirt, her voice low but curious as she glanced up at him. "Is this where we're staying tonight, Dad?" And he gave a small nod, not smiling wide, just enough to let her know everything was fine, because that's what fathers do, they make things feel steady even when the world tilts a little. And at the front desk, a woman in a pressed uniform tapped something into a screen without looking up, her nails clicking in a rhythm that sounded more like dismissal than work, and Marcus stopped just a step away, not too close, not too far, respectful distance, the kind that says I see you before you see me, and he waited, 1 second, 2, 3, the silence stretching just enough to be noticed, but not enough to be called out, and finally she lifted her eyes, not fully, just enough to register him, a quick scan, shoes, jeans, jacket worn at the edges, then back to the screen like she had already decided something. "Can I help you?" she said, but it didn't sound like help, it sounded like procedure, and Marcus nodded once, calm. "Yeah, I'd like a room for the night." Simple, clear, no extra words, and she paused again, fingers hovering above the keyboard like the answer was already forming before she even checked. "We're fully booked," she replied, quick, clean, practiced, and behind him, Ava shifted slightly, her grip tightening just a little, not scared, just aware. Kids always notice the things adults pretend not to see, and Marcus didn't react, not right away, his eyes moving briefly past her to the lobby, to the empty chairs, the quiet elevator doors, the kind of stillness that didn't match what she just said, and then back to her, steady. "You sure about that?" Not challenging, not sharp, just a question placed gently on the table between them, and she finally looked at him fully this time, a flicker of something crossing her face, maybe irritation, maybe certainty. "Yes, sir," she said, and the word sir felt more like distance than respect. "We don't have anything available tonight." And for a moment, nothing moved, not the air, not the light, just a father and his daughter standing in a place that had already decided they didn't belong, and Marcus exhaled slowly, not tired, not defeated, just present, his hand giving Ava's a small reassuring squeeze, and in that quiet, something shifted, not loud, not visible, just enough to matter. The receptionist did not respond right away this time, but her fingers moved again across the keyboard, slower now, as if checking only to confirm what she had already decided, and Marcus watched without leaning in, without pushing, just standing there with the same quiet patience that came from years of waiting in places where people assumed things before asking questions, and beside him Ava tilted her head slightly, her eyes drifting across the chandelier above them, the soft glow catching in her gaze like she was trying to understand why a place that looked so warm could feel so distant. "It is okay, Dad," she whispered, almost to comfort him, and he gave a small nod, the kind that said he heard her, the kind that said she did not need to worry, because he would carry that part for her, always. And across the lobby a man in a tailored suit walked past without slowing, his shoes echoing lightly against the marble, his glance brief but enough to register the scene before moving on. Because some people see everything and choose to see nothing, and behind the desk the receptionist cleared her throat softly. "If you would like, I can recommend a place down the street," she added, her tone still even, still distant, like she was offering a solution without offering respect, and Marcus let that sit for a moment, not rejecting it, not accepting it, just letting the words exist between them, because sometimes silence reveals more than response ever could, and then Ava shifted. Again, her voice a little louder this time, not upset, just honest in the way children are. "But there are rooms, right?" And the question hung in the air, simple and direct, cutting through the practiced language of the room like it did not belong to it, and the receptionist hesitated, just for a second, her eyes flicking toward the screen, then back to the girl, and something almost human passed through her expression before it settled again into formality. "We are not able to accommodate tonight," she said, carefully choosing each word like stepping stones, and Marcus exhaled through his nose, slow, steady, not frustration, just acknowledgement, his gaze lowering briefly to Ava. "Hey," he said softly, crouching just enough to meet her at eye level, his voice calm, grounded. "Sometimes people make decisions before they have all the information." And she blinked up at him, processing, not fully understanding but trusting the tone, trusting him, and he stood again, turning slightly back to the desk, not closer, not further, exactly where he had been. "I appreciate you checking," he said, and there was no sarcasm in it, no edge, just a simple statement that landed differently because of how it was said, and for the first time the receptionist looked uncertain, her posture shifting just a fraction, as if something in his calm had unsettled the certainty she had been holding onto, and from the far side of the lobby, behind a partial glass wall that overlooked the front desk, a woman paused mid-step, her reflection catching in the glass before she turned her head fully, her eyes narrowing slightly as she took in the scene below, the father, the child, the stillness between them. And she did not move closer, not yet, just watched, her gaze sharp but quiet, like someone used to reading rooms before entering them. And back at the desk Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, not rushed, not dramatic, just a simple motion, and he glanced once more at the lobby around him, the space that carried his name in ways no one there seemed to recognize, and then back at the woman in front of him. "Are you absolutely certain," he asked again, softer this time, almost reflective, "that there is nothing available tonight?" And the question did not challenge her authority, it challenged her awareness, and for a brief moment, the entire lobby felt like it was waiting for her answer. The receptionist opened her mouth to respond, but the words did not come as quickly this time, her certainty thinning just enough to show through the cracks, and she glanced once more at the screen, as if hoping it would support her answer more convincingly, but the silence behind her hesitation said more than anything she could have typed, and Marcus stood there without shifting his weight, without pressing forward, his presence steady, almost unmovable, the kind of stillness that does not demand attention but earns it. And Ava looked up at him again, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "Maybe they just do not see us yet." And he gave the smallest smile, not because it was funny, but because it was true in a way she could not fully understand yet, and across the lobby, the woman behind the glass took a slow step forward, her heels making no sound on the carpeted edge as she moved closer, her eyes fixed not on the desk, but on Marcus, studying the way he spoke, the way he waited, the way he did not shrink or push, and something about that unsettled the quiet order she was used to. And back at the desk the receptionist finally spoke, but her voice had changed, just slightly. "Sir, I have already explained that we are not able to accommodate your request tonight." And the words sounded rehearsed now, less grounded, like they were being repeated instead of believed, and Marcus nodded once, accepting that she had made her position clear, and then, without raising his voice or changing his tone, he reached into his pocket again and pulled out his phone, the screen lighting briefly in his hand, and he scrolled once, not hurried, not dramatic, just precise, like someone who knew exactly what he was looking for, and then he lifted it slightly, not to show her, not yet, but to confirm something to himself, and Ava leaned in just a little, curious. "Who are you calling?" she asked, and he answered simply, "Someone who can help them see." And there was no edge in his voice, no satisfaction, just clarity, and he tapped once and lifted the phone to his ear, waiting, his gaze drifting past the desk again, this time not searching, just observing, like he was looking at something familiar through unfamiliar eyes, and the call connected quickly. "Hey," he said, calm as ever. "I am downstairs." A pause, listening. "No, everything is fine." Another pause, his eyes flicking briefly back to the receptionist, who now stood a little straighter, watching him more closely than before. I just need you to come to the lobby for a minute. And he ended the call without explanation, without emphasis, slipping the phone back into his pocket as if the moment had already passed, and the air shifted again, subtle but real, like the room itself had begun to notice something changing, and the receptionist swallowed lightly, her fingers resting on the edge of the desk now instead of the keyboard, and from behind, the woman in heels stepped fully into the open space of the lobby. No longer hidden by glass, her posture composed, her expression unreadable but focused, and she slowed as she approached, not interrupting, not announcing herself, just entering the moment as it unfolded, her gaze moving from Marcus to Ava and back again, and for the first time, there was something different in her eyes, not judgment, not yet understanding, but attention, real attention. The kind that comes before everything changes, and Marcus did not turn to her, did not acknowledge her presence, because he did not need to. He simply stood where he was, one hand resting lightly on Ava's shoulder, waiting, not for permission, not for validation, but for the truth to arrive on its own time. The lobby did not grow louder, but it grew heavier, like the air had thickened just enough for everyone to feel it without knowing why, and Marcus remained exactly where he stood, not shifting, not checking his phone again, not filling the space with words, because he did not need to, and Ava leaned gently into his side, her small shoulder brushing against his jacket. Her eyes now moving between the receptionist and the woman who had stepped closer, sensing something unfolding even if she could not name it, and the receptionist adjusted her posture once more, her chin lifting slightly as if trying to regain control of a moment that was quietly slipping away. "Sir, if there is nothing else, I do have other guests to assist," she said, but her voice no longer carried the same certainty, and Marcus gave a small nod, respectful, acknowledging her role without accepting her conclusion. "Of course," he replied, and then he simply waited, and it was that waiting that unsettled the room the most, not defiance, not confrontation, just the refusal to leave, grounded in something deeper than argument, and from behind, the woman in heels finally spoke, her voice measured, low, carrying the kind of authority that did not need to be raised. "Is there a problem here?" she asked, not to Marcus, not directly to the receptionist, but to the space itself, and the receptionist turned quickly, relief flickering across her face. "No, ma'am, everything is under control," she answered a little too fast, a little too certain, and the woman's gaze shifted back to Marcus, taking him in again, more carefully this time, not just his clothes, but his stillness, the way he held himself, the way he did not react to tension like most people did, and something about that made her pause, just long enough to reconsider what she thought she understood, and Ava looked up at her, curious but unafraid, and for a brief second, their eyes met, and the woman softened almost imperceptibly before returning her focus to the situation. "What seems to be the issue?" she asked again, this time directing the question toward Marcus, and he turned his head slightly, acknowledging her presence without urgency. "No issue," he said calmly. "Just a misunderstanding." And the word landed gently, but it carried weight, because it did not accuse, it invited reflection, and the woman studied him for a moment longer, her expression unreadable, then glanced at the receptionist, who now stood with her hands clasped together, waiting for direction she did not yet receive, and just as the silence stretched to its edge, the elevator at the far end of the lobby chimed softly, a quiet sound, almost easy to miss. But in that moment it felt like a signal, and a man stepped out quickly, his pace faster than the room's usual rhythm, his tie slightly askew as if he had not taken the time to adjust it, his eyes scanning the lobby until they landed on Marcus, and something in his expression shifted immediately, recognition, urgency, something real, and he moved toward them without hesitation, weaving past the chairs, past the stillness, until he reached the front desk, and he did not look at the receptionist. First, he looked at Marcus. "Sir," he said, slightly out of breath but composed, "I am sorry for the delay." And the word "sir" carried a different weight now, not distant, not procedural, but grounded in understanding, and the receptionist froze, her eyes widening just a fraction as she turned toward the man, confusion replacing her earlier certainty, and the woman in heels straightened slightly, her attention sharpening as the pieces began to shift in ways she had not anticipated, and Marcus gave a small nod, the same calm acknowledgement he had given from the beginning. "No problem," he replied, and the room, without a single raised voice, had already begun to change. The man who had just arrived did not rush his words, even though his steps had been quick, and that contrast alone shifted the balance of the room, because urgency without panic carries a different kind of authority, and he turned slightly toward the receptionist, his expression controlled but firm. "Is there a reason Mr. Reed was told we are fully booked?" he asked, and the use of the name landed like a quiet bell, clear and unmistakable, and the receptionist blinked, her posture faltering for the first time. I was not aware," she began, her voice no longer steady, her eyes moving between Marcus and the man beside him, trying to reconcile what she had missed, and Marcus said nothing, not stepping in, not correcting her, because the moment was already unfolding without him needing to guide it, and Ava looked up at him again, her brow slightly furrowed, sensing the shift but not fully understanding it, and he rested his hand lightly on her shoulder, grounding her, the same quiet reassurance he had carried from the start, and the woman in heels took another step closer, her gaze sharpening as she watched the exchange. "Mr. Reed?" she repeated softly, testing the name as if it carried meaning she had not yet uncovered, and the man who had come from the elevator nodded once, respectful but direct. "Yes, ma'am," he said. "Marcus Reed." And then, after a brief pause, he added, "Owner." And the word did not echo, did not explode, but it settled into the room with a weight that no one could ignore, and the receptionist's face strained of color just slightly, her earlier certainty dissolving into something far more fragile, and she straightened quickly, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. I apologize, sir, I did not realize," she said, the words coming faster now, trying to catch up to a reality that had already passed her, and Marcus finally looked at her fully, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with a calm that made the apology feel smaller than the moment deserved, and he nodded once, acknowledging her words without absorbing them. "That is the problem," he said quietly, and the sentence was not harsh, not raised, but it carried more truth than anything else spoken. So far, and the woman in heels stepped closer still, now standing just to the side, her presence no longer distant, her attention fully engaged. "You own this property?" she asked, not doubting but needing to hear it, and Marcus met her gaze briefly, steady. "Yes," he replied, and there was no emphasis in it, no need to prove anything further, because the truth had already been established, and she held his gaze for a second longer than expected, something shifting behind her eyes, not embarrassment. Not yet, but recognition, the beginning of it, and behind the desk the receptionist began typing again, this time quickly, pulling up records, searching for confirmation that had already arrived in the room before it appeared on her screen, and the man beside Marcus spoke again, his tone now more measured. "We have several suites available tonight," he said, glancing briefly at the monitor, then back to Marcus. "They have been held for flexibility." And the contrast between those words and what had been said minutes earlier did not need to be pointed out, it existed on its own, clear and undeniable, and Ava looked up again, her voice soft but bright with understanding. "So there were rooms," she said, and no one answered her, not because they could not, but because the answer was already there, resting in the silence that followed, and Marcus gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze, his voice low, meant only for her but heard by everyone. "Sometimes people see what they expect," he said, "not what is actually in front of them." And the words did not accuse, they revealed, and in that moment, no one in the room could pretend they had not just learned something. No one moved right away, not even the man who had rushed down moments ago, because the shift in the room was no longer about information, it was about awareness. And that kind of change does not happen quickly, it settles, it lingers, it asks people to sit with what they just saw, and Marcus did not step forward, did not claim space that was already his, he simply remained where he had been from the beginning, steady, grounded. As if nothing about this moment required him to become someone else. And that was what made it heavier, because he had not changed, only their understanding had, and the woman in heels took a slow breath, her posture still composed but her expression no longer distant, and she turned slightly toward the receptionist, her voice calm but precise. "What exactly was entered into the system when he asked for a room?" she said, and the receptionist hesitated, her fingers hovering again above the keyboard, but this time there was no confidence behind them, only the quiet realization that every action leaves a trace, and she glanced at the screen, then back at the woman. "I marked it as unavailable," she admitted, her voice lower now, stripped of its earlier certainty, and the woman nodded once, not reacting outwardly, but something in her gaze sharpened, not anger, not frustration, just clarity, and she turned back to Marcus, studying him again, not as a guest, not as a stranger, but as someone she had failed to recognize, and for a moment she said nothing, because there are moments when words arrive too late, and then she spoke, her tone softer, more human than before. "I apologize," she said, and the words were simple, but they carried more weight than the earlier apology, because this one came with awareness, and Marcus met her eyes briefly, not holding the moment longer than needed. "Thank you," he replied, and there was no victory in his voice, no edge, just acknowledgement, and Ava looked between them, her small voice breaking the quiet again. "Are we staying now?" she asked, and this time the question did not hang unanswered. The man from the elevator stepped forward slightly. "Yes, we will take care of everything," he said, his tone respectful, but it was no longer about service, it was about correction, and Marcus nodded once, then looked down at Ava. "Looks like it," he said gently, and she smiled, small but bright, the kind of smile that does not carry the weight of what just happened, only the relief that it is over, and behind the desk the receptionist moved quickly now, typing, correcting, adjusting what should have been right from the beginning, but the speed of her hands could not erase the earlier moment, it could only follow it, and the woman in heels remained where she was, her eyes still on Marcus, and something in her posture softened, not visibly to everyone, but enough to matter, because she had seen something she did not expect, not power, not ownership, but restraint, and that is what stayed with her, and as the keys clicked and the system updated and the room slowly returned to its usual rhythm, Marcus shifted slightly for the first time, not toward the desk, not toward the woman, but toward his daughter, adjusting the strap of her backpack, making sure it sat comfortably on her shoulders, the kind of small gesture that says more about a man than any title ever could, and he glanced once more across the lobby, not with judgment, not with pride, but with a quiet understanding that places are not defined by how they look, but by how they see people, and in that moment, the hotel had learned something it had not been programmed to know. The system finished updating with a soft chime, a small sound that marked the correction but not the cause, and the receptionist stepped back slightly from the screen, her posture more careful now, as if every movement carried a new awareness she had not held before. "Your suite is ready, Mr. Reed," she said, her voice steadier but quieter, and this time the words were not automatic, they were deliberate, chosen with more attention than before, and Marcus nodded once, acknowledging her without extending the moment, because he was not there to linger in what had already passed, and Ava looked up at the desk, her eyes bright again. "Do we still get the big window?" she asked, and the man beside them smiled slightly. "Yes, you do," he replied, and she nodded, satisfied, her focus already shifting to something lighter, something forward, and Marcus watched her for a second, just a second, the tension of the room never reaching her fully, and that was enough for him, and the woman in heels remained still, her gaze following that exchange, and something in her expression changed again, not visibly to most, but enough to matter, because she was no longer watching a situation, she was witnessing a standard, and she stepped closer, now within the same space, no barrier, no distance. "Mr. Reed," she said, and he turned slightly, giving her his attention without urgency. "I should have stepped in sooner," she added, her voice even, but this time it carried something beneath it. Something closer to accountability than authority, and Marcus considered her words for a moment, not weighing them, not judging them, just letting them exist, and then he responded simply. "You are here now." And the sentence did not excuse, it did not dismiss, it placed the moment exactly where it was present, and that seemed to land deeper than anything else could have, because she held his gaze for a fraction longer, then gave a small nod, understanding that some corrections do not come with speeches, they come with awareness, and behind them, the receptionist printed the key cards, her movements precise, careful, like someone learning again how to do something she thought she already knew, and she stepped forward, extending them with both hands. "Your keys, sir," she said. And Marcus took them without hesitation, without pause, just a natural motion, and Ava leaned closer, peeking at the cards like they held something exciting, and he handed one to her. "You are in charge of this one," he said, and she smiled, holding it carefully, like it mattered, and in that small exchange, the room shifted again, softer this time, because dignity does not need to be announced, it shows itself in moments like that, and the man from the elevator stepped aside slightly, gesturing toward the hallway, ready to guide, but Marcus did not move immediately. He turned back to the desk for just a moment, not to correct, not to remind, but to say something simple. "Make sure the next person does not have to ask twice," he said, and there was no weight in his tone, no instruction that demanded obedience, just a quiet expectation that carried more impact than any policy ever could, and the receptionist nodded quickly. "Yes, sir," she replied, and this time the word carried meaning, real meaning, and Marcus gave a final nod, then turned, guiding Ava gently with him as they walked toward the elevators, their steps steady, unhurried, and behind them, the woman in heels remained where she was, watching them go, not with curiosity anymore, but with reflection, because something in that brief encounter had stayed with her, not the mistake, not the reveal, but the way he carried it. The way he did not raise his voice, did not claim space loudly, did not demand anything beyond what should have already been there, and as the elevator doors closed softly behind him and his daughter, the lobby returned to its quiet rhythm, but it was not the same quiet, it was one that had learned something it could not unsee. The elevator doors closed with a soft, almost gentle sound, sealing off the noise of the lobby without fully separating what had just happened, and for a moment neither of them spoke, not because there was nothing to say, but because some moments do not need to be filled, they need to be felt, and Ava leaned back lightly against the wall, her small hand still holding the key card like it was something important, turning it over once. Then again, studying it with quiet curiosity. "Dad," she said after a second, her voice calm but thoughtful. "Why did she say there were no rooms if there were?" And Marcus looked down at her, not answering immediately, not because he did not know, but because he chose his words the same way he chose his silence, carefully, and he rested his hand lightly against the brushed steel rail beside him, his posture relaxed, grounded. "Sometimes," he began, his voice steady and low, "people see what they expect to see," and Ava tilted her head slightly, trying to follow. "Like when I thought my science teacher was mean," she said, recalling something small, something safe, and he gave a faint smile. "Exactly like that," he replied, and the elevator hummed softly as it moved upward, each floor passing without announcement, just a quiet rise, and he continued, not turning it into a lesson, not making it heavy, just offering something she could carry without it weighing her down. "But what matters is how you choose to see people," he added, and she nodded slowly, not fully understanding, but accepting it the way children do, trusting the tone more than the words, and the elevator slowed, then stopped, the doors opening to a hallway lined with soft carpet and warm light, the kind of quiet that feels intentional, and they stepped out together, their footsteps softer now, the tension from earlier no longer following them, but not entirely gone either. Just transformed into something quieter, something reflective, and as they walked, Ava looked up again. "You were not mad," she said, more as an observation than a question, and Marcus glanced at her briefly, then ahead, his voice even. "Being mad would not have helped them see any clearer," he said, and she thought about that, her brows pulling together just slightly. "But they were wrong," she added, and he nodded once. "They were," he agreed, and then after a beat, "But people can be wrong and still learn." And the sentence settled between them, simple, but steady, and they reached the door at the end of the hall, the suite waiting behind it like nothing had happened, like the world had always been ready for them, and Marcus took the key card from Ava's hand gently, then handed it back. "You do it," he said, and she stepped forward, lifting the card carefully, sliding it into the reader with just enough hesitation to show she cared about getting it right, and the light blinked green, a small confirmation, and the door clicked open, and she smiled, proud, stepping inside first, and Marcus followed, pausing just for a second at the threshold, his eyes moving once across the room, not checking, not inspecting, just noticing, the way he always did, and then he stepped in fully, closing the door behind them, and the quiet inside the room was different from the quiet in the lobby. It was softer, safer, and Ava dropped her backpack gently onto the chair, already moving toward the window, drawn to the view she had been promised, and Marcus watched her for a moment, just a moment, the weight of the evening settling into something lighter, something resolved. And he walked over slowly, standing beside her as she pressed her hands lightly against the glass, looking out at the city below, and in the reflection, faint but clear, he could see both of them, side by side, not defined by what had happened downstairs, but by how they had carried it, and that, more than anything, was what stayed. The city stretched wide beneath the glass, lights flickering on one by one as evening settled in, each window carrying a story that no one else could fully see, and Ava pressed her forehead lightly against the cool surface, her breath leaving faint patterns that disappeared as quickly as they came. "It looks like everything is so close," she said quietly, her voice filled with a kind of wonder that had nothing to do with what happened downstairs, and Marcus stood beside her, hands resting loosely at his sides, his gaze moving across the skyline, not searching for anything, just observing, the way he always did, and for a moment, he did not respond, letting her words exist on their own, because sometimes wonder does not need explanation, and then he said softly, "It is close, if you know where you are going." And she glanced up at him, not fully understanding, but smiling anyway, because his voice carried something steady, something she trusted, and she turned back to the window, her attention already shifting to the tiny details below, the cars moving like quiet lines of light, the people too small to see but still there, and Marcus stepped back slightly, giving her space to enjoy the moment, and he walked toward the small table near the window, setting his keys down with a soft sound, the kind that marked the end of a long day without needing to say it. And he sat for a second, just a second, his hands resting loosely together, his shoulders relaxed, the tension from earlier no longer present, not because it was forgotten, but because it had been placed where it belonged, behind him. And Ava turned from the window, walking over with that same light energy children carry. "Are we going to stay here again?" she asked, her voice hopeful, and he looked at her, considering the question not as a business decision, not as ownership, but as a father, and he smiled faintly. "Maybe," he said, and she nodded, satisfied with that, because for her, the answer did not need to be certain, it just needed to feel possible, and she climbed onto the edge of the bed, swinging her legs lightly, already at ease in a place that had not welcomed her minutes ago, and Marcus watched her for a moment, then stood, walking back to the window, his reflection catching in the glass again, older, steadier, shaped by years that had taught him what mattered and what did not, and he looked out at the city once more, not with pride, not with ownership, but with understanding, because places like this were never about the marble or the lights or the view, they were about how people were seen when they walked through the door. And downstairs, far below, the lobby had returned to its rhythm, but something in it had shifted, something quiet but permanent, and up here, in the stillness of the room, Marcus exhaled slowly, not tired, not relieved, just present, and Ava's voice broke the quiet again, softer this time, almost thoughtful. "Dad?" she said, and he turned slightly. "Yeah," he answered, and she looked at him with a kind of clarity that only comes without hesitation. "You did not make them feel bad," she said. And he held her gaze for a second, then shook his head gently. "That was not the goal," he replied, and she tilted her head. "Then what was?" she asked, and he paused, just long enough to let the answer settle into the space between them. "To help them see," he said, and the words did not carry weight, they carried truth, and she nodded slowly, accepting it the way she always did, and the room grew quiet again, not empty, not heavy, just calm, and outside, the city continued without pause. Unaware of the small shift that had happened within one of its buildings, a shift that would not be written down, would not be announced, but would remain in the way someone looked up a little sooner, listened a little longer, and chose, just once, to see clearly, and Marcus stood there beside his daughter, not as an owner, not as a guest, but as a man who understood something simple and steady, that dignity does not need to be proven, only carried, and in that quiet, it was enough.